Right, that should be okay now. Let's try that. Oh, this technology. How are you doing? How are you dealing with it, Brian? Are you finding it's better or worse than the whole thing of working remotely? How much is it affecting you? Are you doing endless FaceTime and Zoom calls? Are you able to quietly work on to long-term projects and write?
Yeah, I mean that's what has happened. I mean, we're supposed to be filming at the moment. We're making a new series for the BBC, and we got about 2 days of that done, and then this happened, and it's a big sort of 5 hours of television. So that's on hold. So what I've realised, and I think a lot of people will face this, is that of course when things ease, so whenever that is, then all the things that you were supposed to have been doing now are going to all cram in, and so everyone's going to be supremely busy. I suspect that. I mean, obviously, as we said the other day, it depends what your job is. I mean, there are many people who I respect immensely and do not envy at all who are having to go to their places of work. I mean, it's obviously health workers and doctors and nurses and those people, but so there are different segments of society, aren't there?
Yeah.
We're a small section of society probably that essentially can reshuffle things. And so essentially what I'm doing is trying to do all the things that I should have been doing later in the year, in particular, trying to write a new book, which is about black holes, which requires a tremendous amount of understanding. And so what I've been doing is trying to relearn in some parts, but learn as well a whole load of physics that I didn't really know enough about. And so it's that's what I'm doing really. So I'm spending a lot of time like a hermit, sort of thinking and trying to get my head around ideas. It's interesting. I was talking to someone the other day about it. I don't know how you find it when you're trying to, I don't know what it would be, learn a new technique or something like that. In when it's physics, you have to. For me, anyway, it's a process of stumbling along and reading something in one textbook, if there is a textbook version of it, and reading some papers, and reading something in another textbook. I've got about 5 textbooks here on quantum mechanics, advanced quantum mechanics, that are all open at the same section, which is for the connoisseurs there. It's something called the density matrix, which is there. And it's something that I find that I don't understand the process. You read something, you don't quite get it. You read something, you think a while, you read some more. And after about sometimes 2 or 3 weeks of going through that and just thinking again, then suddenly you develop your own picture of it, and then you understand it. And that act of understanding is something that I don't understand. I don't know what obviously the person who wrote the textbook had a very clear vision, thought they did it very clearly, and that's the way they understand it. But I find, especially with more complicated things and advanced things, that it's never the case that I understand it after reading one chapter of one textbook or one paper or something. It's always this process of lots of different viewpoints, and then somewhere my picture will emerge, and it might take weeks, a month, but it might never emerge. It might be too complicated, but often it does.
I mean, it's interesting that you say picture there and someone's vision. Is it something? Do you visualize these things? Do we all? I mean, I'm aware that I always think of things in terms of images and being able to see things, often sort of three-dimensional, sometimes in the sense of being able to move around a space, but it's very visual. But it's interesting. I mean, I think the things that you talk about is often sort of mathematical and logical. But is it literally what you say that you start to form a picture of it in a sort of visual way, or are you using it figuratively?
No, I think with me actually, it is very often a picture, even if it's an abstract. I'm using picture in a very general sense. It's constructs, but I think it's not. I'm not one of those people who does it mathematically, who understands the maths and that's enough, or actually even sufficient. I need to have some you would call it a physical picture, but some kind of rough idea, almost a non-verbal idea of what's happening. I'll give you an example. I've got one of the books here, actually. It just happens to be sat on the table, and I'll show you a picture of someone sitting outside a black hole, gathering information from what's called the Hawking radiation, and then jumping into the black hole to try and catch a person who's inside to compare notes, which is actually a paradox, which is something you can't do. And so there's a picture. I don't know if you can see.
You can't do it because it would be dangerous to do it, or you literally couldn't do it.
No, you literally can't do it. And that's a picture. So that's a picture. It's a rather distorted kind of diagram.
Yeah.
But those are the sort of diagrams that, this is a great book by Leonard Susskind and James Lindsay called Black Holes, Information and the String Theory Revolution. So those diagrams are the way I think that many people think, because general relativity, which is Einstein's theory of gravity, is a geometric theory. So it is a theory that lends itself to pictures. And actually, I remember talking to someone about Stephen Hawking, who knew him very well, and said that he almost developed an advantage, or he developed an advantage because he couldn't write things down, certainly in the latter half of his life, pretty much. It's very, very difficult to write things down. He couldn't go to a blackboard, and do what most people would do. So he developed an internal picture, a geometric way of thinking, which very appropriate for Einstein's theory. And so he developed a whole internal set of tools, which were pictures, visual tools to think about these things, like that diagram that I just showed you, and made great strides that many other people didn't make, because he had a different set of tools and a different way of looking at the world forced upon him. Distorted images deliberately. So they're distorted.
Well, they're two-dimensional for a start, and that's one of the problems with diagrams in books.
You said portraiture is a subtle caricature, I think you said.
Yeah.
I thought it was great.
Thank you.
It is, because that's the difference, between photography, I suppose. I mean, obviously you can do that in photography with lighting and things, but really what you're trying to do is just bring out characteristics by emphasizing them a little bit sometimes. And in those diagrams, so infinity is represented on those diagrams in a place on the diagram. So you have a way of changing the geometry. And this is what Escher did, right? So if you look at a lot of Escher, some of the Escher paintings which represent infinity, because you can change in a formal way, a mathematical way, the distances, the way you represent distance on the canvas, in order to bring infinity onto your canvas. And that's what those diagrams are in part. And so, and I was thinking about how to talk about it. And one way, we're all familiar with that, with the projections of the maps of the Earth. So the map of the whole Earth. When we look at that globe, and we see there are actually infinities there. Essentially, we see the North Pole and South Pole.
Absolutely.
And that's why there's very heavy distortion. Because that's a projection. Onto a piece of paper.
Greenland is about the size of Africa.
But it's a formal mathematical transformation between the surface of a sphere and a flat
totally.
plane.
I was thinking the other day, though, you never see maps of the Earth taken from above or below, so with the North Pole in the centre, because that would be an interesting distortion to look at.
You do see that. There's a great one. I don't know, people on Twitter who watch it. There's a great friend of mine called Captain Dave is his Twitter name. He's an A380 pilot, captain for BA. And he posted the polar maps that they use when they're navigating. Well,
they must be very conscious of it when they're flying to like California from London, or because that's the route they take is quite far north, isn't it?
Yeah, and so they have a map where there's indeed the North Pole is in the middle.
Nice.
And really weird because you have this kind of everything surrounding the poles. You have Britain over there, and like you said, California in a straight line. Pretty much, so it's on those maps that you kind of fly a straight line across. It's similar to what you were talking about yesterday about the way that you slightly emphasize or de-emphasize parts of the 3D image
Yeah.
of some space in order to say something.
Well, there's the thing. I mean, I love this whole thing. I find myself. I mean, when I'm painting on my own, I'll sort of maybe start a radio show or a YouTube video or something, and then it's a bit too far to reach, and I'm a bit too absorbed to stop, to change it, and then you get a few random things afterwards. I'm sure we've all done that. A fantastic one a few months ago about what I come with these, the title of it was, but it's to do with sort of like maps and the sort of limitations of maps, and the map is not the territory. I think that was one of the quotes. Yeah, basically all maps are simplifications and distortions. And obviously the simplification is useful. If you want to get across London as quickly as possible, you want a road map, preferably one with traffic as well. But if you're trying to get across by tube, the road map is less useful. And if you're trying to dig underground or do any kind of other things, or understand what the different areas of the city are like and what sort of people live there and what kind of shops are there and all that kind of thing, you don't get that from a road map. But then if you had all that information in one map, then it would take you much longer to navigate. And I think there's cognitive mapping. It's comparing it to how we think, basically, and we think in a different way, in a much more sort of spatial, four-dimensional. If you have to draw a map for someone to get somewhere, the map you draw with it's just the streets that you go down and the turnings you have to make, because that's how we remember journeys we make. We don't remember every part of the city or the country in equal sort of resolution. We remember the routes we're familiar with in great detail and a vague sense of how things snake off and join up otherwise. And so
these things are a great example, actually. That one that I showed from this map of the black hole here, which is what it is. So these maps are such that light always travels at 45 degrees.
Right.
So the path of a light ray is always a 45-degree line on that map, even though the space is incredibly distorted. So actually, from a perspective of someone sitting outside, there's a real perspective. Light's being bent all over the place.
Yeah.
Right. But on those maps, the light goes at 45 degrees from any event that happens. So it's a very heavily distorted thing. What it allows you to do is look at what's called the causal structure. So it allows you to understand which places, which events in space and time can you influence other events and which can't, which is really important for black holes. So it's built to emphasize something you need. It's like you said, the tube map is a great example, because it's a map of connections, isn't it, really? Yeah. It's saying if I want to connect from this place to this place, given this network, where do I get on, where do I get off, how do I travel? And you say it bears a loose resemblance to the actual physical distance, because the physical distance doesn't matter. It's the connections that matter in the network. Yeah. So you do that map. So it depends what you want.
It's a wonderful, actually. It's a famous simplification, wasn't it? It was Bell who did it in the 30s, I think, because it's got that sort of slightly Art Deco kind of aesthetic to it, and the idea that you kind of reduce things to sort of an octagonal, kind of format has been copied by almost every transport system in the world. It wasn't actually his job to do it. He worked at the Tube or something like that, didn't he? There was some nice story around it. Someone will know. But it sort of like takes someone sometimes who's not too steeped in the orthodoxies and formulas of how to do things to see a much better way of doing things.
Yeah. Because distance is irrelevant. I suppose time and connection is what you care about.
Yeah.
That thing, and not even time.
There's a sort of, isn't there a famous thing of, if you give someone a tube map and ask them to tell them to race you from like Mansion House to Bank or something, I can't remember which two stations it is, someone will know. And because you have to do about 4 connections on the tube. But then the other person can just come out of the one tube station and walk 200 yards to the other one, because actually on the surface they're much closer than they look on the tube map.
Yeah, yeah.
So just remind me again about what happens to light sort of near or in black holes?
So light travels if we go back, so light travels through this curved and distorted fabric of the universe near a black hole. So essentially, if you've got a flash of light inside the event horizon of the black hole, so close to where the star, if it was a star that collapsed, close to that thing called the singularity. Then the path of the light always stays inside. Not only always stays inside the horizon, but goes to the singularity. All paths of everything inside the event horizon end at the singularity, which is the end of time. Right, so it's the end of time in that region. So you go into a region of, it's a good way of thinking about it. You can get into a region of space where there is the end of time is a place in your future and not very far into your future, because your path will go to it in a very small amount of time, minutes, seconds, hours, depending on how, but not months. Right, depending on how massive the black hole is and what you're doing, but it's a matter of minutes and hours that you end up at the end of time, inexorably. So it's a very strange thing. So that's what happens to. So light is no exception. But light has a path; it traces a path out through the universe, and all its paths inside the event horizon end at the end of time on the singularity. So. Yeah, they're very strange things. So I've got to find a way of talking about that. That's what I'm thinking about at the moment.
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking about is have I made your jaw a bit too wide? Just correct a couple of things. Sorry if I was looking a bit. Maybe that's something
slightly
a bit
more
like
American or whatever. Like one of those.
Rugged,
slightly too rugged.
It's hard to know how much the kind of the lens distorts it as well, because I think particularly when you're close to it, it tends to have that slight wide angle way of splaying the face sort of open and making it. That's why apparently there are a lot more people wanting nose jobs since the sort of like people started doing selfies, because the kind of distortion of the whatever it is 28mm lens at 18 inches away from your face, as we know, makes the things in the middle bigger and everything else smaller. But people then get upset that their pictures look, their nose looks much bigger in their pictures than other people's do.
Yeah. What is it? Do you know what the focal length of a MacBook Pro lens is?
That's a good question. Actually, I don't know what on the MacBook. Yeah, of course. I'm pretty sure the phones are like 28mm, which is a sort of. What's that? A slightly wider. It's quite a wide lens. I mean, the kind of 50 is the kind of like seen as the sort of normal. 85 is the classic portrait lens, where you get sort of minimal. You minimise the distortion of the kind of the face, but obviously it crops quite close. And as these things get better, we can all have wide angle lenses, because the AI can correct the lens shift, and we enough pixels, then you can just crop the bit you want.
Yeah.
It's geeky photography stuff. Someone will probably correct me some of my mistakes. I think that's about how it is. Well, and I know Brian's quite interested in cameras, because we've discussed our interest. You say you got a new camera?
Yeah. I got so years ago. I used to use. Lots of people who are listening to are kind of semi-pro or interested. I had a Canon 5D Mark II, right, which is a classic camera. Loads of people had, and beautiful camera. And I started buying old lenses for it. And old lenses, in general, are quite mostly a relatively cheap things to buy. Yeah. And you can put them on most cameras, right? So do
you mean pre-autofocus?
Yeah. So they're and so I started buying old Leica lenses.
Lovely.
And at the time, they were really not expensive at all. I think the 50mm that you mentioned, the classic 50mm f2 lens, was about 300 quid for a good one.
Wow.
Right. And if you think about it, compared to a modern, Canon or Nikon autofocus lens, that's at the cheap end.
Yeah.
And I loved them. So I started buying more of them, and ended up with quite a collection of these old Leica lenses. In fact, my favourite, you said the portrait lens, the 85, 90mm. I have a 90mm that I bought, and I think it was about 200 quid, honestly. But it was 1968, which is when I was born. So I saw it off, and it was a 1968 lens. It was the same age as me, so I bought it. And I love it. It's a beautiful 90mm f2.8 lens. couple of £100. Still one of my favourite lenses. And so because I'd got all these lenses, and every time I've changed cameras and I got some Sony cameras and things, I've always put these lenses on them. And so eventually I decided to buy, Leica brought out a camera called the SL, which was basically would take all of their lenses, the old SLR lenses they made, these so-called R lenses. So I bought the SL, and now I've got the SL2, which has just come out, and it's beautiful. But one interesting thing is, like you said about the lens corrections. So it has a database of corrections for a lot of the old lenses that they made in it. So either if it's one of the newer ones, it can tell what lens it is, or it can tell it what it is, and it'll correct. I don't know whether I like that, though. I mean, the reason I like these old lenses is because they have a character.
Yeah. Yes.
You know.
Yeah, and the software can also, recreate some of that as well. It feels more extravagant these days, having kind of nice cameras, because the phones, on a sunny day, there's so little advantage in having a really sort of fancy camera over your phone. It's obviously kind of indoors, and particularly when in low light, that you can obviously do much more with it and get much cleaner images. But that may not be the case forever. And I love the way
physics, though, isn't it? It is physics ultimately.
Yeah.
I mean, a camera phone is small.
Yeah.
The lens is small, and you can't get around optics.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. You can do lots of clever things with lots of little lenses, which is the way they work, right?
And also they can sort of hallucinate, as I think some people call it. What it's missing by using machine learning, and the sort of knowledge of what photos generally look like. I love that stuff. I think it's machine. I think it's not the GANs. It's one of the other one, but some of the stuff some of the kind of machine learning around visuals is so interesting. But even the stuff around upscaling photographs from the past and making blurry photos sharp, which is obviously still in the early stages, but it's just crazy you can do it at all, isn't it? I mean, it's totally logical, because once you sort of see it, they explain how it works, and but it is a sort of weird thought that actually some of your photos from the past, which you kind of thought weren't very good, may still be, you can maybe be able to improve on them.
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting, isn't it? It's about this is actually, I'm thinking of these terms because of black holes again, but it's all about information. So the big problem in black hole physics is information. What happens to it? Just the 1 minute or the 1 second summary is that in physics we think information is conserved, right? So don't destroy it. And so the question arises: what happens if you throw information, a book or a hard drive, whatever it is, into a black hole? That information should come out again at some point in the future, in the far future. And it should come out. Black hole evaporates; it should all be there.
And we say should because we don't know, because we haven't actually seen it happen.
Well, Stephen Hawking's initial calculation of Hawking radiation was that it's what's called thermal, so it's got no information in it. So the black hole evaporates away. So any information that you throw in does not get returned to the universe. Now, that was his initial calculation. Now, that is wrong. We're sure it's right. He decided it was wrong, but he did the first calculation, basically. But the way that it's wrong is not fully understood. So the way that how it can be that this information can be returned to the outside universe without contradictions and it is really not fully understood. But it goes back to that. I'm just thinking, because you talk about these photographs, I suppose what you're doing there, if you're using machine learning and AI and a knowledge of how photographs should look, is you're actually adding information in, aren't you? The information is not there.
It's not, yes, exactly. It's not necessarily accurate. So if there's a detail that was unique to that picture, you'll miss it because you're making assumptions based on generally how other blurry photos compare to sharp ones.
Yeah. So you're adding.
Yeah. So it's not giving you. So it wouldn't be much good for your astronomy, but it is quite useful from the point of view of trying to make sort of something was otherwise a good composition. We like seeing things sharply, or at least some parts of the photo sharply.
Yeah.
And another thing that's funny about the kind of the way cameras work, obviously, is the thing of portrait mode, where it takes obviously kind of the subject in focus and everything else is out of focus. which is hilarious again. I mean, especially for those of us who did grow up using traditional cameras, and you would often go to huge lengths to try and get everything in focus, to increase the depth of field, which is obviously quite hard, especially when there wasn't much light. And so the idea that you've got this little brilliant device, and because of how compressed it is, it naturally has a very, very broad depth of field, and therefore want to make the sort of image worse is a funny one. But of course, it does make what it does is directs your focus on the bits that's wanted. And in a sense, I think that's where what's interesting about that is it starts to become a little bit closer to how our minds and how we reassemble images in our brain, because we don't take in every part of an image in equal depth and detail at the same time.
So this is getting really geeky now about photography, but when we did Wonders of the Solar System, which is the first big series that I did, the cameraman Kevin White had he wanted to use these old lenses, right? Old prime lenses. They were Cook lenses, actually, that he bought. I think they were 1970s lenses. So great thing, and the technology had just come out to be able to connect them onto the video cameras of the time, right? And it was this thing called a Pro 35, which was kind of a thing with a ground glass screen in it that spun round, and you attach the lens on it, and it had like a rubber band, and it kept breaking. If you got it cold, it'd seize up and make a weird noise. And it was a real cumbersome thing. But what it meant was that you had to shoot with a very wide aperture. You had to shoot these lenses wide open, sort of f2 or something like that. Because if you narrowed the aperture down, which, as you said, gives you an increased depth of field, you could resolve you started to resolve the glass screen. So you started to see the grain on the screen it was using. So you couldn't do it. So you had to shoot wide open. So you get a very out of focus background, which is what you were talking about, because you have to with those. And so the upshot of that was we had this very cinematic look to Wonders of the Solar System, with these very defocused backgrounds, a lot of lens flare and all that stuff. But it was kind of driven by this new technology and this choice to use old lenses, because we both liked them. We liked the aesthetic of them. But it led to a kind of a trend in a lot of science documentary where people started shooting like that because it looks nice. It looks like high quality somehow. But actually, it's kind of not in a way. It's kind of driven by the limitations of the technology, or it was at the time. Now it's not. Now you can do anything you want, right?
You can do cheat it afterwards.
Anyway, but in 2009, it was really very difficult to do. Yeah. So there you go. That's a very geeky.
Another thing that stuck in my mind, a lot of people kind of get obsessed about the kind of level of detail and equate it with sort of megapixels in a photo. But was it you telling me this? Someone said that the resolution of the human eye, it's equivalent to about 3 megapixels, I think. Whereas some of these kind of cameras have like 20, 30, 40, 50, even the phones I think have about 10. And the reason for that is obviously that actually the density in our eyes is very concentrated in one area, and actually cameras don't have that sort of concentration. As we look around, we are moving that around. So we believe we have this kind of huge resolution. And effectively we do, but only on the bit we're actually looking at. The rest is very low res.
Oh, processing. It's I remember we talked the other day about Infinite Monkey Cage, the thing I do on Radio 4, and I remember another program that we did about the visual experience, and the fact that we build a model, so we exist in an internal model of the world that we are built, and so as you said, we feel like we've got this 3-dimensional understanding, a very wide picture. When we look out, there are no edges to our vision. There are no edges. There are, though. I mean, our eyes, as you said, are quite low resolution and very small little lenses. So there really is, their field of view is not infinite, right? They're a camera lens. It's like the camera on your phone. Your camera on your phone, better.
And but we also we have 2 of them, picking up slightly different reflections of objects, and obviously seeing sort of depth and a little bit around things. But it interests me. I mean, of course, and again, the thing about the portrait mode, the blur representing depth is the language of 20th century photography. Because actually the human eye doesn't really see blurring. It's that very, very slightly, something very near and far away. What we see as depth is parallel images, because of the 2 eyes taking in different things, and the same with movement. So like cartoonists have, they have this like parallel lines next to them suggest the characters moving fast. But depth is, parallel lines. And that's actually in a way why I think sometimes, possibly, initially accidentally, but, paintings where there's like sort of like strong brush strokes have this remind us of the animation and the depth that we get in real life. And you never get that in photography.
Yeah. There was, I remember that we filmed toads. There was some experiments done on toads, right? Because they have a visual system which is very primitive in some ways, but it's extremely good at detecting things that look like worms, basically, because they want to eat them. And so, and I think if I remember rightly, it was if you sent something in a line, like that horizontal across its field of view, it saw it and it got it. If you sent something vertical across its field of view, it didn't see it at all. It just didn't see the motion. So that
because that's the motion that's relevant. Yeah, nice.
Well, they've got to be very, very quick. And if you think about it, it's something that we struggle with today. We talked about AI the other day.
Yeah.
That processing, getting computers to recognise things which you see in self-driving cars and things like that, is extremely hard.
Yeah.
It takes vast amounts of processing power. Yeah. And we are doing it in our brains. And so...
And that's something that's... Sorry. I think, but I might say that's something that surprised people working on it, because it's taking much longer than they thought, because it is hard to teach an AI from scratch the difference between a plastic bag blowing into the street, which doesn't matter very much, and an animal or a child or something, which obviously does. And that's because, of course, the sort of way they move, and I think we instinctively know the difference, because it's one of those things which I think also kind of CGI hasn't ever got done properly, and struggles with, even though it's done brilliantly, is the sort of human movements, whether it's especially faces but also bodies, because we're so sensitive to it, so tuned into that. And whereas spaceship flying across the sky, we don't actually know what that would look like, so we're happy to sort of take someone else's version of it quite happily.
Yeah. So what are you? Why don't you describe? Because I can't see it.
Yeah. Well,
what are you doing?
So what I'm doing, I'm sort of slightly idly playing around, mixing some of the colours in that I put down before, so smoothing it, and then extending the kind of area. I've started with the middle of your face, partly because I'm quite close to it and I'm not stepping back very much, but also it's I'm taking advantage of you being here in front of me, and doing the bits where there's some like animation, and it's interesting, and the light's good today actually, and I've just seen something else which I missed before, and whereas the sort of peripheral, and this is partly because this is how I usually work, the peripheral details, maybe the hair and the clothes, I can leave till later. I could do it without you here from a photo more easily, or I might not do very much to them at all. It depends if it needs it or not. But that's the sort of stage I'm at. It's kind of, I've corrected a few things today. I think the eye, I've made repositioned the eyes very slightly, and there were, when you're working quickly, you then you find that some things have gone right and some things not, and you tend to notice it more clearly when you come back to it. And so while you've got that critical eye, which gradually is dulled after looking at the same image for an hour or so, you're trying to kind of take advantage of that to sort of like fix any sort of big things that are wrong, because little things sort of sort themselves out. I think I don't know. I have this problem with Dexter's one of knowing when to stop. I don't think it's definitely nowhere near finished yet. But I'm thinking, maybe if I get enough done today, I might do a bit to it sort of before the next sitting. But as always, I'll share it, and I'll record it and show what I do for people who wanted to watch the whole process. Because I think definitely it's moving the right way, and it'd be nice to think where are we now, Wednesday. If we can do another one on Saturday. That would be a good time, I think, to show it to you at the end of that sitting. Always a slightly sort of tense moment, but I think that so that's the sort of stage I'm at. I mean, the point these things.
Do you develop a kind of a sense of, because obviously when you show people things that you've done or made, that people are always going to go, oh, that's nice, or whatever.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
bullshit, right?
That's very shrewd. No, it's exactly what happens. No matter what happens, when you show someone the picture the first time, the first thing they say is, "Oh, it's great," which I think is partly nervousness because they're nervous. And actually, I've realised in later years that actually so often they're more nervous because I actually have done it quite a few times, and I can, it's a bit shame when people hate it, but it doesn't happen too often, and you can go like overall most people don't. But that is that moment. It's almost like a relief. It's like, oh right, it's not terrible, and then what happens is they then go quiet. And then over the course of maybe 20, 30 seconds or a minute, they sort of take it all in. And then they give their sort of actual reaction to it. And even then, there's a funny thing. I think I mentioned it before, but the way people...
Under the chair. The other way, you'll get it.
Sorry. But yeah, there's a funny thing. I think we don't know what we look like. We do know what we look like, but the thing we know is what we see in the mirror in the morning, which is a sort of like a particular face from a particular angle, and it's reversed, and we see photos of ourselves, which are obviously all distorted one way or another. Maybe some of us edit out the bad ones and just keep the ones where we look vaguely heroic or like a film star. I don't know, but I think we have this idea of what we look like, but we're not used to seeing something from someone else's point of view, and beyond that, it's obviously this is a kind of process where I'm filtering things and distorting things and emphasizing certain things in a particular way, which might be different how someone else sees it. So whatever you expecting, it's not going to be that. But what's interesting, and also the other thing is we don't tend to see, because of looking in the mirror or from photos, it might be a bit different from you because you've seen yourself presumably. What you've watched back some of the films you've made and seen yourself talking, and I think that's probably fairly unusual. I think that we're used to seeing our still images of ourselves occasionally moving, but not very much of how we actually speak and react to things. And that's why very often it's much more useful to get the reaction of someone who knows you well, like I think we talked about it at the start, but because someone who knows you will say in a split second if that is the kind of image of the person that they know. If that fits with this sort of like, if that's familiar, then that's good. And if they're like, then there's something wrong with it.
Yeah. It also, a similar thing happens listening to your voice as well. I mean, I'm used to hearing my voice. I don't think anyone likes hearing their voice. But over the years, you make radio programs, especially, you have to listen to them when we're editing. I do voiceover, and when you hear it all the time, you get used to it.
Why is it though? Why is it that we don't just like our voice, but we don't mind images of ourselves on some occasions? Is it because it doesn't match the voice we sound in our head because the acoustics of the way sound travels through our head from our vocal cords to our ears?
Yeah, because I think very few people hear their own voice. As you said, most people do over the years see pictures of themselves, and these days, I suppose if you go back 40, 50 years, it was less likely, but now you see pictures of yourself all the time.
Yeah.
And so, but it's interesting, isn't it, that hearing your own voice is something that you never do unless it's an unusual situation, like you're a radio or TV presenter or something like that, and then you hear it. And most people hate their own voice. I always think that when I used to do music, I used to be a sound engineer for a while. I had a little job as a sound engineer. And I always thought that you can tell when artists, even very famous artists, have too much control over their mix in particular, because they put loads of reverb on their voice. Yeah. Well, and I hate it because I want to hear singers. But there's so many great singers that
It's funny, isn't it? John Lennon was one, wasn't he? He famously hated his own voice, and though everything was double tracked, which was kind of like 60s version, where you kind of like it sounds echoed, and that's very distinctive now. But he had an amazing voice. I wonder if it's something about we what we find we don't like. I don't think it's something you have when you're growing up. You're conscious of how you're different from other people, and seeing that as a negative. It's often portrayed that way by other kids at school, or you're trying to fit in. But actually, what's interesting as you get older, whether it's your voice and making music, or in my case, what people look like, it's their idiosyncrasies which are what's interesting to me. Actually, that is what's interesting about us, and what's unique about us, and what helps identify us in the minds of other people. But it's something which, maybe you have to sort of learn that, because your instinct is for it to be the other way, not draw attention to yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's I've not thought about it before so much, but as we've been talking, we've talked a lot about how you build a picture of the world, and you also, as you've said, you have a picture of yourself, and you've got very little information about yourself. If you think about it, unless you spend an awful lot of time making 3D scans of your own head and pictures of yourself,
who would do that?
and recording yourself and listening to yourself. Most people have a very little information about themselves. The visual and audio representation, the way they walk.
Yeah.
Right? Most people, you wouldn't know how you walk.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Unless you've seen yourself.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, obviously, before the 20th century, this was the way that you might know about what you look like, other than looking in the mirror. But until you had sort of like video and film, then that was very, it's unlikely to know. I mean, I had that experience, that thing, the Royal Academy, of doing a 3D scan and then being able to look at yourself in virtual reality one way, or printing it out and seeing a three-dimensional but precise version of yourself is such a strange thing, because the proportions are different from how you imagine, because obviously it's a physical thing. It's more like how other people see you, rather than the flat representations which we're used to. But of course, that's going to become much more normal in the coming years. Yeah,
and physical scale, size, height. I mean, even as you said rightly, I've seen myself on television a lot, because it's not because I sit watching my own programs, but when you're making, you have to sit and watch rough cuts and edit, so you see yourself all the time, whether you want to or not. And but you never see. I'm usually on my own. Yeah. So I get, it's a common thing, but I get it all the time. Like, people go, "Oh, you're so much taller than I thought." Because I'm quite tall, and that sense of scale is never available to you, is it? You never know how, when you walk into a room, how big you look to other people, or something like that. Or otherwise, it's interesting.
And it's something to do with the proportions, isn't it? It's like someone's, kind of the scale of someone's head to their body. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe you've got an abnormally large brain. We did sort of talk about this the other day, the surface area and the information thing. Maybe, if it could contain all those thoughts, you have to have a larger surface area of head, which, doesn't, translates on you. The whole thing must be smaller. No one can have a head that big, is what people are thinking. Obviously in a totally good way. How are we doing on time, by the way?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Oh, but good, great. This is good, and he's been looking at me the whole thing. I'm sure there's some people out there who've got questions for you. I know that I've been deluged with people. Keith Tyson obviously had some questions which I'm struggling to understand fully, about sort of entropy and whether the universe is made up of information. It's mathematical. And not anyway. I'll let him ask that one. The entropy question is interesting. I was watching one of your films back again when you're talking about that. But I'm sure. Are you following any of the social media? Do we have any?
Today everyone's just saying how amazingly well the painting's come along, but I guess this isn't the right format for the questions directly for Brian, and he might have some more on his Twitter.
Well, he probably gets a lot of questions anyway.
No, people are just. So it's quite. I've sent paintings.
Oh, good. Well, we should pull those and put them up somewhere, the little gallery at some point. I'll put them on the Instagram. I got some good ones of Dexter as well, actually. I like it. I mean, I think, and that's the one advantage of this format, really, is that I think, certainly if you're looking at this online, on our website, we've got a little pop-up window of you, so you can basically see what I'm seeing. And I mean, yes, I mean, I've got a slight head start that I've seen Brian in real life quite a few times, but I think most of us have seen him sort of at work in different ways. And I think that does mean you can do this sort of thing a little bit quicker, because you've got a bit of a sense of what someone's. I mean, starting from scratch with someone, you're not so good at knowing which things are right and wrong. But you guys at home, have a go. Probably a lot of you are, and we'd love to see those. I'd love to see how people sort of, if they're kind of developing as well as this little series goes on.
Does Brian draw or paint? There's a question.
Did you hear that?
Yeah. No, I'm terrible at it. But it's in, whether you could learn, whether one could learn, I don't know. But I'm certainly not natural. If I sit down and sketch something, I don't know how to do it.
Sketching is a kind of, I always think of it as a bit like a muscle that you can exercise. When I haven't done enough of it, I slow down, and then when I've been doing a lot, I speed up a lot. And actually, Keith was talking about it in terms of something you can. It's a sort of, it's a skill of something. But I think some other things that people have propensity for. I don't know that much about it actually. But I think there's also people who can make aesthetic judgments, but not necessarily do the activity themselves, and therefore there's a sort of like, there's two sides to it. There's the sort of like having the mind to understand, appreciate, and edit something, and then there's the literal skill. And I think music's a sort of particularly another obvious example of that. You can produce music and really sort of like work with music, but not necessarily play the instruments. How did you get started with music?
I didn't really learn how to play instruments. I wanted to be in a band. I mean, it was like that was quite, I got really interested in music just in listening to bands. Like I got into, because this is like late 70s, early 80s, when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, and I was really into the charts, but I liked things like Ultravox and OMD and Kraftwerk, and I liked that electronic music of the time. And so a friend of mine was also interested in that stuff, and we were also a bit physicsy, a bit geeky, and so we had a studio which was basically partly home built, so, because in those days, if you wanted to synchronize a drum machine up to something, you had to build a little box to do it. So I remember our physics teacher, we went to our physics teacher and said, we've got this hi-hat in this drum machine, and we want to make it into a noise gate, which is something that will open and close when the hi-hat triggers. And because we had an electronic organ, and we wanted to play a chord and have it go like dig 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 dig, like Ultravox, right? Because Ultravox had these big sort of polyphonic chords, and they trigger them like. And so you had to solder things together, to make these little circuits. So it was kind of like that, and then I just so I taught myself to play keyboards because I wanted to be in a band. So I didn't have lessons. I just wanted to do that stuff. And initially just mono synths, because we couldn't afford polyphonic synthesizers. And then ultimately learn how to play. And then so it was like that really. It was kind of been into just having a hobby of playing around with synthesizers and electronic instruments. And yeah.
So you've already had asked that question many times, but I think my audience are pretty interested in that. What's that? Have you got?
Someone's asking, what does Brian think Hawkins would have discovered next?
He was the last time I saw him. He was at a dinner. It was his birthday dinner in Cambridge, and quite a lot of people there. And he gave a talk at the end of the dinner, and he said it was just at the moment where we'd started detecting black hole collisions through what's called gravitational waves. So we've in the last few years, we've been able to see black holes colliding together. And that data was beginning to be the first experimental test of a lot of the work that he'd done throughout his life. So it's delighted and interested that these things, which, I mean, it's great actually, if you read any books about him, everybody says, and I was lucky enough to get to know him sort of later in his life, how funny and obviously this huge character, this big, bold, almost brazen,
funny,
kind of, and very obviously very, very confident, a big physics brain, and right in your face with his physics, he was. And so he was kind of saying, obviously, kind of with this wry smile that he had, obviously they're just proving my stuff right, but he meant, so that's the way he'd talk about it. But of course, there's so many nuances and subtleties. So that's what he was interested in, because the black holes had in his last few years, and now after he died, have become an experimental objects. Right, they've become objects that we can probe. Yeah. We can see them, so we can make a start in testing these theories, which are absolutely fundamental to our understanding of what space and time are. It's fundamental stuff. So I think that's what he would have been doing. He would have been, with great delight, looking at how this data that we're beginning to get now is another window onto these objects.
That's pretty good. So you're pretty deep into black holes at the moment, basically. That's your...
Yeah. Which actually turns out to be all of physics. I was talking to, again, mentioned him, people that don't know, Jeff Forshaw is a mutual friend of ours, and I've written books with him over the years, many years, and loads of papers. We've done loads of physics
together. Wasn't he, Jeff was your professor, wasn't he, when you were...
Well, we're the same age.
Yeah.
But I went to university a bit later because I've been in music.
Because you were touring
5 years ahead of me in his career. So yeah, he was a young lecturer at Manchester in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so I did a postgrad course with him on particle physics when I was in the first year of my PhD. But then we wrote a paper together just after that. So we've always kind of worked together.
Yeah.
What did I mention him now? I've wondered. I've done that.
Black holes. Black holes?
Yeah. What was he saying? He said something to me earlier, and I've completely forgotten. I've lost the thread.
Jeff, I can't believe Jeff isn't watching and helping out with this. Where is he?
He probably is watching.
I missed Jeff.
Sorry, forgot what it was.
We've got 5 minutes.
Okay. Do you know what? I think we should get in touch with Jeff for next time, actually. And also, I'd like to hear his voice again.
Oh, that was it. I was saying to him, I've had to reappraise a lot of physics that I thought I knew. Right, I just thought, okay, that's stuff. I have a very full understanding of that. But actually, trying to understand, in particular, black holes really tests your very foundational, basic knowledge, and it's interesting. So I'm going back over stuff that, I thought I understood in great detail, and actually it turns out that perhaps I didn't, and you get a different picture. So it goes back to pictures, which is what we started talking about. The more pictures you have of something, the more you understand it.
It's good. Well, speaking of which, we're sort of coming close to the end of the hour, aren't we? We've got 5 minutes left. Okay, that's good. And I messed up the side of your face there, made you a little bit chipmunky. But other than that, that's all fixable. It's interesting.
Someone's asking actually what brushes you use for what. I mean, I don't know if this now's the time, but you could.
It's a good question. I mean, very simply, hog's hair and sable. Kind of big sort of brush strokes and very sort of delicate ones. Because I haven't brought that many home with me, I'm using a slightly dried up old one, as you can probably see. But you make some interesting marks, and these are really too kind of fine and expensive to be using for sort of like hack around with. But it's very nice tools. But yeah, very simply, you can use something that's a bit stiffer for putting the thicker marks and paint on. And these, some of you might have noticed I've been sort of blending in some of the marks I made the other day, a little to make gives a slightly more of a realist sort of softening. But you obviously don't want to go too far with that. What can look a bit airbrushed, and see it's a bit of a little process of kind of backwards and forwards with that sort of thing. I find trying to get the balance right, but it's got slightly more of that than the last painting. But you'll see. Each one has a life of its own, really. And I think the nice thing, if I try and plan something too much at the start or imagine how it's going to look, it always goes wrong. I end up sort of like then barking up the wrong tree, and these things have to sort of, they tend to lead a little life of their own, and it's better when they do that. I'm doing that. I can see one of the mistakes is there. But yeah, one of the nice things about having someone in front of you, there's an image of them moving and shifting position and that kind of thing, is you do see more things and you see the way the light bounces more and you see how they move. The downside is sometimes you can end up not spotting the fact that you've got the sort of mouth pointing one way and eyes pointing another until quite late on, and then you have to undo all that. But you want a little bit of that. It's back to the sort of caricature thing. You want to sort of like, to actually to remind you of how people are when they're moving in front of you rather than looking static like a photo. But yeah, sometimes you have to step in and analyze it a bit. So I think we're coming closer to the end of it. Actually, it's not a bad time to stop. These sessions have been an hour long, partly because that seems to be a standard format for some things. And actually, I guess naturally what I would do with people is do it for more like an hour and a half, because I feel that's usually the sort of the arc of the kind of conversation, and what I'm doing often works out like that. But partly because I'm painting quite quickly, and partly because the conversation is so rich and dense and interesting, I feel like we've had a full session. So anyway, but thank you, Brian. I think obviously I could talk for days with you, but it's a real joy, and I hope you guys have enjoyed some of this. And we will, do send us questions and send us your pictures, because we want to see those. But really, thank you for watching and tuning in. We'll do another one on Saturday if that works for you. And if I'm going to do any in between, I'll let you guys know, and I'll put it online. It slightly depends when I wake up in the morning tomorrow and have a look at it and see if it looks right or wrong to me. I'll know. Anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you for watching, and please come back and see some more. And on Saturday, we're going to show Brian the picture, hopefully. So we'll have that moment where he bursts into tears and then never speaks to me again. Thanks, man. See you soon. Bye.
Should I stop streaming?
Yeah, I got you.